The Galactic Empire Shattered. First document. The Zephyrian Grand Council had ruled the galaxy for 5 millennia with an iron fist wrapped in silk diplomacy. Their crystalline cities floated among the stars, each one a testament to their technological superiority and unwavering control. The Council believed in order above all else, and for 5,000 years they had maintained perfect peace through perfect submission. Every species in the galaxy knew their place. The Altarians mined precious metals from asteroid belts, their 4 arms making them efficient workers. The cetacean mines of Hydros managed the vast water worlds that fed the galaxy. The insectoid hive collectives of Kepler maintained the communication networks that connected thousands of worlds. Each race had been assigned their role, their purpose, their limitations. Humanity had been classified as a Tier 7 species, agricultural workers and basic laborers. The Zephyrians had discovered Earth 300 years ago, when humans were still fighting with gunpowder and steel. The blue world with its single moon seemed quaint to the advanced aliens. The bipedal creatures showed some promise for manual labor, so they were given a simple choice: serve the Empire or face extinction. Most humans chose service. They were relocated to farming worlds, mining colonies, and construction sites across the galaxy. Children were separated from parents and educated in imperial schools that taught submission and gratitude. The human language was slowly replaced with galactic standard. Earth itself became an agricultural world, its great cities demolished and replaced with endless fields of alien crops. But the Zephyrians had made a critical error in their assessment. They had only observed humanity during peacetime. They had never seen what happened when humans were pushed beyond their breaking point. Commander Sarah Chen stood in the observation deck of Mining Station Omega-7, watching the massive asteroid being carved apart by human workers. The station hung in the void between 2 gas giants, its lights the only warmth in the cold darkness. Sarah had been born here 35 years ago when her parents were assigned to the mining operation. She had never seen Earth, never breathed air that wasn't recycled 1,000 times. The workers below moved like ants, their pressure suits gleaming under the harsh industrial lights. Most were human, though a few Altarians supervised the more delicate operations. Sarah knew every worker by name: Marcus, who told stories of old Earth; Elena, who sang while she worked; David, whose hands never stopped shaking since the mine collapse last year. "Supervisor Chen," came a voice behind her. Sarah turned to see Zextar, the Zephyrian overseer, approaching with his usual floating gait. His translucent blue skin rippled with patterns that Sarah had learned to read over the years. Right now, they showed mild irritation. "Overseer," Sarah replied, keeping her voice neutral. "The productivity reports show a decline of 3% this cycle. This is unacceptable. The Council demands an explanation." Sarah clenched her fists behind her back. 2 workers died in the collapse. Morale is low. These things take time to recover. Time is a luxury the Empire cannot afford. You will increase output by 10% next cycle, or we will find a more suitable supervisor. The threat hung in the air between them. Sarah had seen what happened to unsuitable supervisors. They disappeared, along with their families, relocated to places where the work was harder and the life expectancy shorter. "Understood, Overseer." Zextar glided away, leaving Sarah alone with her anger. She looked down at the workers again, seeing the exhaustion in their movements, the defeat in their posture. These people were broken, ground down by centuries of oppression. But sometimes, late at night when the overseers slept, Sarah heard whispers. Stories passed down from the old ones who remembered Earth. Tales of wars and heroes, of humans who fought impossible odds and won. The whispers spoke of something called Marines. 3 sectors away, On the peaceful world of Harmonious Garden, the first crack in the Empire's foundation began to spread. The Kepler Collective had always been the most loyal of the Empire's servants. Their hive mind made them efficient, and their insectoid nature made them naturally hierarchical. They had served faithfully for over 4,000 years. Queen Zext 9947 felt the disturbance first. It rippled through the collective consciousness like a stone thrown into still water. One of her children, worker drone 7739, had witnessed something on the remote mining world of Titan's Rest. The drone's memories flowed through the collective, carrying with them something the Keplers had never experienced before: inspiration. The human mining crew on Titan's Rest had been trapped by a cave-in. Standard protocol dictated leaving them to die rather than risk additional workers in a rescue attempt. But the humans had refused to abandon their comrades. They had dug by hand, working for 72 hours straight without rest, until they broke through and pulled their friends to safety. The act of selfless sacrifice had confused the Kepler drone. In their collective individual lives were expendable for the good of the hive. But these humans valued each individual life as irreplaceable. The concept was alien, fascinating, and dangerous. Queen Zext 9947 tried to suppress the memory, to quarantine it from the rest of the collective. But it was too late. The idea had taken root, spreading through the hive mind like a virus. For the first time in 4 millennia, individual Keplers began to think of themselves as more than just components in a machine. On the water world of depths below, cetacean philosopher Kuuma the Deep Thinker felt the change in the cosmic currents. The great whale-like beings of Hydros had always been contemplative, spending centuries in meditation beneath their world's endless oceans. They had been among the first to surrender to the Empire, seeing conflict as a disruption of the natural order. But lately, Kuuma had been dreaming of storms. The dreams came from the human workers on the agricultural platforms that floated on Hydros' surface. These small, air-breathing creatures worked in the sun, while the cetaceans dwelt in the depths. There had been little interaction between the species for generations, but something was changing in the humans. Their songs, which they thought no one could hear, carried across the water and down to the deep places. They were songs of earth, of blue skies and green forests, of mountains that touched the clouds and oceans that sparkled in sunlight. They were songs of loss and longing, but also of hope. And in those songs, Kuuma heard something that made the ancient cetacean's heart race. They were songs of rebellion. Back on mining station Omega-7, Sarah Chen received a message that would change everything. It came through the old emergency channels, the ones supposedly monitored by Imperial surveillance. But the message was encoded in something the Zephyrians had never bothered to learn: human poetry. Roses are red, violets are blue, the eagle has landed, and freedom's for you. It was a simple children's rhyme, meaningless to alien ears. But to Sarah, it meant everything. Somewhere in the galaxy, humans were organizing. The resistance that had been whispered about in dark corners was real. The message included coordinates and a single word in ancient English: Semper. Sarah had heard that word before in the stories the old ones told. It meant always. But it was more than that. It was a promise. A commitment that transcended death itself. It was what the Marines had said when they swore to protect humanity. That night, Sarah called together the work crew supervisors. 12 humans gathered in the maintenance bay, speaking in whispers while the station's automated systems hummed around them. These were people Sarah had known her entire life, people she trusted with her own existence. "I received a message today," she began, her voice barely audible. "There are others like us, on other worlds, in other systems, and they're planning something." Marcus, the oldest of the group, leaned forward. "What kind of something?" Sarah took a deep breath. "Revolution." The word hung in the air like an explosive charge. For 3 centuries, humans had been taught that resistance was futile. The empire was too vast, too powerful, but the message had included more than just coordinates. It had included technical specifications for weapons that could be built from mining equipment, tactical manuals disguised as maintenance procedures, and most importantly, proof that humans across the galaxy were ready to fight. The Zephyrians made a mistake, Sarah continued. They scattered us across the galaxy, thinking it would make us weak, but they put us everywhere. Every mining operation, every agricultural world, every construction project. We're in their infrastructure, their supply lines, their most sensitive installations, and we've been invisible to them for so long that they've forgotten we can think. Elena spoke up from the back of the group. What about our families, our children? We protect them by freeing them, Sarah replied. The message says there's a place called Haven, a world the Empire doesn't know about, where humans can be human again. But first, we have to fight for it. Over the following weeks, the resistance network on mining station Omega-7 grew quietly. Tools were modified into weapons. Maintenance schedules were altered to create blind spots in surveillance. Most importantly, messages began flowing through the network to other human settlements. The response was overwhelming. From the farming colonies of the Outer Rim to the construction platforms orbiting dying stars, humans were ready to reclaim their dignity. The network grew exponentially, spreading through the galaxy like wildfire. But the Zephyrians were not fools. They had maintained their empire for 5,000 years by being vigilant against threats. And as human activity increased across multiple worlds, their surveillance systems began detecting patterns. Overseer Zextar noticed it first on Omega-7. Productivity had actually increased, but the humans were moving differently. There was purpose in their steps, determination in their eyes. They worked with an efficiency that seemed almost military in nature. The Zephyrian ran analysis on the behavioral patterns and discovered something disturbing. The humans were organizing themselves into small units, each with specialized roles. Some focused on technical systems, others on logistics, still others on what appeared to be tactical planning. It was as if they were transforming from laborers into something else entirely. Zextar reported his concerns to the Grand Council, but they dismissed his warnings. Humans were Tier 7, barely above animals in intelligence. They were incapable of coordinated resistance on any meaningful scale. The Council had other concerns, like the recent strange behavior among the Kepler collectives and the unusual philosophical movements among the cetaceans. They failed to see that all these events were connected, that humanity's influence was spreading beyond their own species, inspiring other races to question the eternal order of the Empire. The galaxy was beginning to wake up from 5,000 years of enforced sleep. Sarah Chen stood once again on the observation deck of Omega-7, but this time she wasn't alone. Marcus, Elena, David, and the others stood with her, no longer looking like broken laborers. They stood straight, their eyes clear, their hands steady. In just a few weeks, they had transformed themselves from victims into something the galaxy hadn't seen for centuries. They had become soldiers. The message had been sent across the network. In 72 hours, simultaneously across 1,000 worlds, humanity would strike back. The signal would be simple. Every human-operated facility in the galaxy would go dark at exactly the same moment. Mining stations, agricultural platforms, construction sites, communication relays. The Empire's infrastructure, built on the backs of human labor, would suddenly and catastrophically fail. But that was just the beginning. As Sarah looked out at the stars, she thought about the stories the old ones told. About Marines who never retreated, never surrendered, never left their brothers behind. Those Marines were gone, lost to time and conquest. But their spirit lived on in every human heart. The Zephyrians had shattered 5,000 years of peace. Now they were about to learn why that might have been a mistake. They were about to discover what happened when you made an enemy of humanity. And humanity was about to remember what it meant to be human. The Galactic Empire Shattered. Second document. The galaxy-wide blackout lasted exactly 17 minutes and 43 seconds. When the lights came back on, the Zephyrian Empire discovered that everything had changed. Grand Admiral Thessara stood in the command center of the Imperial flagship Eternal Dominion, watching damage reports flood in from across the galaxy. Every single human-operated facility had gone dark simultaneously, from the massive agricultural complexes feeding the core worlds to the remote mining stations in the Outer Rim. But the humans hadn't simply shut down the systems. They had sabotaged them in ways that would take months to repair. "How is this possible?" Thessara demanded, her crystalline features crackling with bioelectric fury. "Humans are Tier 7. They lack the intelligence for coordinated action on this scale." Her aide, a nervous Zephyrian named Kextal, consulted his datapad with trembling hands. "Admiral, initial reports suggest the humans have been planning this for cycles. They've developed their own communication network, somehow bypassing our surveillance systems entirely. The sabotage shows sophisticated understanding of our technology." Thessara's form shimmered with disbelief. In 5,000 years of imperial rule, no species had ever mounted successful coordinated resistance. Individual uprisings had been crushed easily, their leaders executed, and their populations relocated. But this wasn't an uprising. This was warfare. "Deploy the battle fleets to all affected systems," she commanded. "Begin immediate arrests of all human supervisors and work crew leaders. Implement Protocol 7 across all colonies." Protocol 7 was the Empire's final solution to rebellion, complete extermination of the resistant population, followed by replacement with more compliant species. It had been used only 3 times in Imperial history, and each time it had ended organized resistance permanently. But as the Imperial fleets launched across the galaxy, they discovered that the humans were no longer where they were supposed to be. On Mining Station Omega 7, Overseer Zextar frantically searched through empty corridors and abandoned work sites. The humans were gone. All of them. Not just the obvious leaders like Sarah Chen, but every single human on the station. Somehow, 3,000 people had vanished without triggering a single alarm. What Zextar didn't know was that the humans hadn't vanished. They had simply moved to places the Empire never thought to look. Sarah Chen crouched in the maintenance shaft beneath the station's main reactor, surrounded by 24 humans armed with improvised weapons. They had spent weeks mapping every hidden space in the facility, every service tunnel and forgotten storage bay. While the Empire searched the obvious places, humanity was learning to fight from the shadows. "Remember," Sarah whispered to her team, "we're not trying to hold territory. We're trying to hurt them. Hit fast, hit hard, and disappear. Make them afraid to turn their backs on any corner of their own stations." The human resistance had learned from 3 centuries of oppression. They knew they couldn't match the Empire's technology or numbers in open battle. But they had something the Empire didn't understand: the ability to think like individuals while acting as one people. Across the galaxy, similar scenes were playing out. On the agricultural world of Green Harvest, humans emerged from hidden bunkers to sabotage the massive grain processing plants. On the construction platform orbiting the neutron star Pulsar 7, human workers trapped inside the superstructure began systematically destroying critical systems from within. But the most devastating strike came from an unexpected source. Queen ZXT-9947 of the Kepler Collective had been struggling with the alien concept of individualism for weeks. The human behavior on Titan's Rest had infected her hive mind with dangerous ideas about the value of single lives. She had tried to quarantine these thoughts, but they continued to spread through her children like a virus. When the galaxy-wide blackout occurred, ZXT-99947 finally understood what she was witnessing. The humans weren't just rebelling against the Empire. They were demonstrating something the Keplers had never truly grasped: the power of choosing to act together while remaining individual beings. The realization struck the Queen like a physical blow. Her species had surrendered their individuality for the efficiency of the collective. But what if that surrender had been a mistake? What if the humans were showing them a better way? KEXT 9947 made a decision that would have been impossible for any Kepler in 4,000 years. She chose to help the humans, not because the collective willed it, but because she, as an individual, believed it was right. The Kepler communication networks spanned the entire galaxy, connecting every Imperial world and facility. When ZXT 99947 sent her signal, it reached every human resistance cell simultaneously. Suddenly, the scattered freedom fighters had access to real-time intelligence on Imperial fleet movements, garrison strengths, and strategic vulnerabilities. But more than that, they had an ally. "This is unprecedented," Admiral Thisara muttered as reports of Kepler cooperation with human rebels flooded her command center. "The collective has been our most loyal servant species for millennia. How could they betray us?" The answer came from an unexpected source. Deep beneath the oceans of Hydros, the ancient cetacean philosopher Ku'uma, the Deep Thinker, had been composing an epic poem about the human rebellion. The cetaceans were poets and philosophers by nature, and the human songs of freedom had stirred something deep in their collective consciousness. When Ku'uma's poem reached the surface, carried by the currents and whale song, it sparked a transformation among the Hydros population. The cetaceans began to remember their own songs, their own dreams of freedom that had been suppressed for 5,000 years. The massive beings rose from the depths, breaching the surface of their world's oceans in displays of joy and defiance not seen since the early days of imperial conquest. Their song, amplified by their planet's unique crystalline formations, reached across space to other cetacean colonies. Within hours, the Empire's entire aquatic agriculture system was in revolt. Captain Marcus Reeves, formerly a mining supervisor on the asteroid belt colony of Ceres 9, now led a strike team of 50 humans through the corridors of an Imperial supply depot. They moved with the fluid precision of a unit that had trained together for months, not weeks. "The old stories were true," whispered Elena Vasquez, the team's communications specialist, as she hacked into the depot's security systems. "Humans really did fight like this once, like soldiers, like Marines." The stories had become more than just memories. As the resistance spread, humans across the galaxy began remembering skills their species had supposedly lost. Military tactics, guerrilla warfare, unit cohesion under fire. It was as if the knowledge was encoded in their DNA, waiting for the right moment to resurface. Marcus checked his improvised rifle, a mining laser modified for combat effectiveness. "The Empire made a mistake when they scattered us across the galaxy. They put us in every system, every facility, every weak point in their infrastructure. They gave us 300 years to learn their technology and map their defenses. And they never bothered to learn what we were really capable of," added David Park, the team's demolitions expert, hefting a backpack full of mining charges repurposed as explosives. The team moved deeper into the depot, following intelligence provided by their Kepler allies. Their target was the main ammunition storage for the 7th Imperial Fleet, currently deployed to crush human uprisings in the Outer Rim. If they could destroy those supplies, the fleet would be forced to withdraw for resupply, giving the resistance valuable time to consolidate. But as they approached their objective, Marcus realized they weren't alone in the depot. The sound of blaster fire echoed from the main storage area, and the distinctive battle cries of Imperial shock troops filled the corridors. "Zephyrian Special Forces," Elena reported grimly. "Looks like we walked into a trap." Marcus smiled grimly. "No, Elena. They walked into ours. The human resistance had learned to think 3 steps ahead of their enemies. While the Imperial forces had been tracking this team, they had failed to notice the other 5 human units that had infiltrated the depot through different routes. As the Zephyrians closed in on Marcus's team, they found themselves surrounded by humans emerging from maintenance shafts, storage compartments, and ventilation systems. The battle was brief but decisive. The Zephyrian troops, trained for conventional warfare, couldn't adapt to the humans' fluid tactics. When the fighting ended, the depot was in human hands, and its massive ammunition stores had been turned into a weapon against the Empire. The explosion was visible from 3 star systems away. News of the depot's destruction spread through the human network faster than Imperial communications could carry word to their own forces. Within hours, resistance cells across the galaxy were launching similar raids, targeting Imperial logistics and supply lines with devastating effectiveness. But the Empire's response was swift and brutal. Grand Admiral Thyssara authorized the use of orbital bombardment against any world showing signs of rebellion. The agricultural colony of New Eden was the first to be targeted, its entire surface turned to glass by Imperial dreadnoughts. The message was clear: surrender or face extinction. For a moment, the human resistance wavered. How could they fight an enemy capable of destroying entire worlds? How could improvised weapons and guerrilla tactics stand against the technological might of a 5,000-year-old empire? The answer came from Sarah Chen, broadcasting from a hidden base in the outer asteroid fields. "They're afraid," she said, her voice carrying across the human network to every resistance cell in the galaxy. "They wouldn't be using planet killers if they weren't desperate. They know we're winning." She was right. The Empire's use of orbital bombardment was a sign of weakness, not strength. For 5,000 years, they had maintained control through the threat of force, rarely needing to use their ultimate weapons. But now they were using them regularly, turning productive worlds into dead rocks in a futile attempt to crush human resistance. Each destroyed world only strengthened human resolve. More importantly, it horrified the Empire's other subject species. The Kepler's collective consciousness recoiled from the senseless destruction. The cetaceans composed funeral songs for the dead worlds. Even species that had remained neutral began to question whether the Empire deserved their loyalty. "The humans have shown us something we had forgotten," Queen ZXT-9947 transmitted to her fellow collective queens. "The courage to resist injustice, even at the cost of individual survival. Perhaps it is time for us to remember what we were before we became servants." One by one, the Kepler collectives declared their independence from the Empire. Their rebellion was different from the humans' guerrilla warfare. When a hive mind revolted, entire planets simply stopped obeying Imperial commands. Communications networks went silent. Manufacturing facilities shut down. Transportation systems ceased operation. The Empire found itself fighting a war on multiple fronts against enemies it had never imagined could threaten its authority. On the bridge of Eternal Dominion, Grand Admiral Thyssara stared at tactical displays showing red warning indicators across half the galaxy. Rebellions were spreading faster than her fleets could respond. Human strikes were crippling Imperial infrastructure. Entire species were joining the revolt. "How," she whispered to herself, "how did Tier 7 barbarians accomplish what 5,000 years of Imperial rule said was impossible?" The answer was simpler than the Admiral could comprehend. The Empire had built its power on the assumption that order was superior to chaos, that compliance was stronger than resistance, that individual will could always be broken by sufficient force. But they had never faced a species that could remain individual while choosing to stand together. They had never encountered beings who could adapt, improvise, and overcome any obstacle through sheer determination. They had never met humans who remembered what it meant to be Marines. In the deep space between galaxies, A message was transmitted on an old frequency that the Empire had long since forgotten to monitor. It was brief, encoded in ancient human languages, and directed to a place that officially didn't exist. Semper Fidelis. The core is needed. Humanity calls for aid. The message traveled across impossible distances, carrying with it the hopes of billions of humans scattered across the galaxy. It carried the dreams of freedom that had been suppressed but never destroyed. It carried the promise that had been whispered in mining tunnels and work camps for 300 years. Somewhere in the darkness between stars, something heard that call, and something began to move. The Galactic Empire, shattered. Third document. The answer arrived on a Tuesday. Sarah Chen was coordinating resistance operations from Haven, a hidden world in the void between where no Imperial sensors could reach, when the long-range sensors detected something impossible. Ships were approaching from the galactic edge, moving at velocities that defied known physics. The sensor readings made no sense until Sarah realized what she was looking at. They weren't faster than light. They were riding the edge of a black hole's ergosphere, using gravitational slingshot maneuvers that required mathematical precision beyond anything the current galaxy had achieved. The ships were old, their designs dating back to humanity's earliest ventures into space, but they had been modified with technology that made Imperial starships look primitive. Unknown vessels, this is Haven Control, Sarah transmitted on the emergency frequency. Identify yourselves. The response came in a voice that carried the weight of centuries, speaking in English so pure it could have come from ancient Earth itself. Haven Control. This is Colonel James Mitchell, 1st Battalion, 3rd Marine Expeditionary Force. We received your call for assistance. Permission to land and assess the tactical situation. Sarah's hands trembled as she gripped the communications console. Marines, real Marines, not the scattered resistance fighters who had taken the name, but the genuine article. The stories hadn't been legends after all. The landing was unlike anything the galaxy had seen. The Marine ships descended through Haven's atmosphere with impossible precision, their hulls scarred by what looked like centuries of combat. They touched down in perfect formation, and from their ramps emerged figures that seemed to step out of humanity's oldest myths. Colonel Mitchell was tall and lean, his uniform bearing insignia that belonged in history books. His eyes held the weight of someone who had seen civilizations rise and fall. Behind him came Marines, whose very presence radiated competence and lethality. These weren't the broken laborers the Empire had created. These were warriors who had never forgotten what they were fighting for. "Ma'am," Mitchell said, saluting Sarah with crisp military precision. "We apologize for the delay. It's a long way from the Magellanic Clouds." Sarah stared at him in amazement. "The Magellanic Clouds? You've been out there for 300 years? Longer than that, actually. We've been preparing for this day since we realized the Empire's true nature. Building ships, training warriors, gathering allies, waiting for humanity to call us home." Mitchell's explanation revealed the truth behind humanity's greatest secret. When the Zephyrian Empire had conquered Earth, not all humans had surrendered. A small group of Marines, scientists and civilians, had escaped the planet in experimental ships, fleeing to the satellite galaxies where the Empire had no presence. For 3 centuries, they had built a hidden civilization dedicated to one purpose: returning to free their people when the time was right. They had established colonies on rogue planets, built shipyards in the void between stars, and trained generation after generation of warriors who had never known defeat. "We've been watching the rebellion through Kepler communication networks," Mitchell continued. "Impressive work with limited resources, but now it's time to finish this properly." The Marine reinforcements numbered only in the thousands, but their impact was immediate and devastating. They brought with them weapons and technology that had been developed over 3 centuries of focused military research. gravity weapons that could crush Imperial dreadnoughts, stealth systems that made their ships invisible to any sensor. Most importantly, they brought knowledge. The Empire's greatest weakness, Mitchell explained to Sarah and the other resistance leaders, is that they've become dependent on their servants. Strip away their subject species, and they're just another advanced civilization with delusions of grandeur. The Marine strategy was elegant in its simplicity. Instead of attacking Imperial strongholds directly, they would accelerate the rebellion of subject species until the Empire collapsed under the weight of its own contradictions. The first target was the Altarian home system. The four-armed miners had never shown any interest in rebellion, accepting their role in the Imperial hierarchy with apparent contentment. But the Marines understood something about the Altarians that the Empire had missed. Their mining expertise wasn't just technical knowledge, it was cultural identity. When Marine infiltration teams began spreading information about the Empire's plans to replace manual mining with automated systems, the Altarian reaction was explosive. Entire mining fleets went rogue overnight, taking their asteroid-sized ships and heading for empty space. Without Altarian mining operations, the Empire's economy began to hemorrhage resources. The crystalline entities of the Sigma Draconis system were next. These silicon-based life forms had served as the Empire's primary data storage and analysis network for millennia. The Marines revealed that the Empire was planning to replace them with quantum computers, making their species obsolete. The crystallines' rebellion was subtle, but devastating. They began introducing errors into Imperial databases, corrupting navigation data, and feeding false intelligence to Imperial commanders. Suddenly, Imperial fleets found themselves lost in space, their tactical computers providing contradictory information. But the most significant breakthrough came when the Marines made contact with the Ethereal Collective. The Ethereals were beings of pure energy who existed in the quantum foam between dimensions. The Empire had enslaved them centuries ago, forcing them to power the faster-than-light communication networks that held the galaxy together. The Marines had discovered something remarkable about the Ethereals during their long exile. They were humanity's children. Impossible, Admiral Thisara breathed as she reviewed the intelligence report. Humans are barely spacefaring. They couldn't have created a transcendent species. But the evidence was undeniable. Deep in the Marines' archives were records of humanity's first experiments with consciousness transfer, conducted in the desperate final days before Earth's conquest. A small group of human volunteers had uploaded their minds into quantum substrates, becoming beings of pure thought and energy. The Empire had been using humanity's own descendants as slaves for 3 centuries. When the Ethereal Collective learned the truth, their rage shook the fabric of space-time itself. The Galactic Communication Network didn't just fail, it exploded, sending cascades of psychic energy across the galaxy that severed every Imperial connection simultaneously. The Empire found itself fighting a war against an enemy they could no longer coordinate against, using resources they couldn't track, with servants who no longer obeyed their commands. Grand Admiral Thisara stood alone on the bridge of eternal dominion, watching her empire collapse in real time. The tactical display showed nothing but red warnings and system failures. Half her fleets had gone dark when the communication network failed. The other half were reporting impossible human victories against overwhelming odds. "How are they doing this?" she demanded of her remaining staff. "How are primitives defeating the greatest military force in galactic history?" The answer came from an unexpected source. Overseer Zextal, who had escaped the destruction of mining station Omega-7, stepped forward with a datapad containing his analysis of human combat effectiveness. "Admiral, we made a fundamental error in our assessment of humanity. We evaluated them as individuals and found them wanting, but humans don't fight as individuals. They fight as part of something larger than themselves." Zextal's data showed the impossible. human military units that achieved coordination levels exceeding even the Kepler Collective, individual humans making sacrificial decisions that maximize the effectiveness of their entire species. Tactical innovations that emerged from the bottom up, spreading through the human network faster than imperial computers could analyze them. They call it esprit de corps, Zextal continued. The belief that the group's mission is more important than individual survival. It makes them unpredictable, adaptable, and absolutely ruthless in pursuit of their objectives. As if summoned by his words, the space around Eternal Dominion suddenly filled with ships. Not the improvised resistance vessels the Empire had grown accustomed to, but sleek warships bearing the insignia of the human colonial marines. They moved in perfect formation, their weapons charging with the distinctive whine of gravity disruptors. Eternal Dominion, this is Colonel Mitchell aboard the HMCS Unconquerable. You are ordered to surrender immediately. Admiral Thaisara stared at the ships surrounding her flagship. There were only 30 of them against her dreadnought and its escort fleet of 200 vessels. By any rational calculation, the humans were hopelessly outnumbered. But Thaisara had learned to fear human irrationality. Colonel Mitchell, she replied, you are outnumbered 7-1. Surrender, and we will consider allowing your species to continue existing as servants. Mitchell's response was pure marine. Admiral, you are surrounded by humans who have been preparing for this moment for 300 years. I suggest you consider who is actually outnumbered. The battle was over in 18 minutes. The marine ships moved like dancers, their gravity weapons tearing through Imperial shields as if they were paper. The Eternal Dominion's escort fleet found their own weapons turned against them as human computer viruses, introduced by ethereal allies, took control of Imperial targeting systems. When the flagship's shields finally failed, Admiral Thaisara found herself face-to-face with Colonel Mitchell via emergency hologram. The Marine's expression was calm, professional, and absolutely implacable. Admiral, you have one chance to end this war without further bloodshed. Order all Imperial forces to stand down and withdraw to the core worlds. Release all enslaved species and return them to their homelands. Accept that the age of Galactic Empire is over. Thaisara's crystalline features crackled with fury. You are one species among thousands. You cannot maintain control over an entire galaxy. We're not trying to control anything, Mitchell replied. We're trying to free everything. There's a difference you never bothered to learn. The final phase of the war was unlike anything in galactic history. Instead of conquering Imperial territory, the human-led coalition simply liberated it. Worlds were returned to their original inhabitants. Enslaved species were given ships and resources to return home. The vast Imperial infrastructure was dismantled, and its components distributed to those who needed them. The Zephyrian core worlds were offered the same choice as everyone else: freedom or continued resistance. Most chose freedom, abandoning their empire to join the new galactic community that was emerging from its ashes. A year after the first shots of the rebellion, Sarah Chen stood on the observation deck of Haven Station, watching refugee ships arriving from across the galaxy. Humans were coming home, not just to Haven, but to hundreds of new worlds where they could build lives free from Imperial oppression. But they weren't alone. Kepler collectives were establishing colonies where individual consciousness could coexist with hive cooperation. Cetacean philosopher ships were exploring the deepest reaches of space, composing epic poems about the beauty of freedom. Altarian mining guilds were terraforming dead worlds into gardens. Was it worth it? Asked Elena, joining Sarah at the observation window. All the fighting? All the death? Sarah watched a transport ship disgorge a group of human children who had never seen a world without Imperial overseers. Their laughter echoed through the station corridors, carrying with it the promise of a future where humanity could be fully human again. Ask me in 100 years, Sarah replied. "When those children have children, and no one alive remembers what it was like to live on their knees." Colonel Mitchell approached from behind, his duty uniform replaced with the simple clothes of a civilian. The Marines were disbanding now that their mission was complete, their members choosing new lives in the free galaxy they had helped create. "Any regrets, Colonel?" Sarah asked. Mitchell smiled, and for the first time since his arrival, he looked his age. "Just one. That it took us 300 years to come home. But we're here now, and we'll never let humanity be enslaved again." Outside the station, the galaxy spun on through space, no longer bound by the rigid order of empire. It was messier now, more chaotic, sometimes dangerous, but it was alive in a way it hadn't been for 5,000 years. The Zephyrian Empire had shattered 5,000 years of peace. Humanity had responded with the Marines, and the galaxy would never be the same.